Well, welcome everyone this afternoon to our Illustrator Highlights Foundation Gather. We're grateful to have Pat Cummings host our talk today with author illustrators Mike Curato and Dan Santat. Pat is an author, illustrator, and teacher. She is an advocate for story in all its forms, through art, through words, and through bringing new voices to the page. Thank you for hosting this Highlights Foundation Gather, Pat.
Good to see you.
Mike Curato is an illustrator and an author and an imaginator. His Little Elliot books are beloved by all. And speaking of love, we all love Mike's Worms, Bees, and Bugs in Worm Loves Worm, written by J.J. Austrian. Mike has two 2020 releases, picture book The Power of One, written by Trudy Ludwig, and his first YA graphic novel, which we'll hear more about today, Flamer. I'll be linking to both in the chat. Mike, thank you so much for being with us. We're happy to have you as always. I'm really excited about this. Let me get through this intro.
Oh my God.
Dan Santat is an author and illustrator. His work in the children's book Playground is vast. He is the author-illustrator of the 2015 Caldecott-winning The Adventures of Beagle, the Unimaginary Friend, and the very timely, I've talked about it so often the last few months, Are We There Yet? Because after all, today is a present. He released Lift this month, written by Min Lei, and his forthcoming 2020 illustrated works include Little Fox and the Wild Imagination and The Alphabet's Alphabet. Dan, we are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. I've always been admiring the Highlights Foundation from afar, hoping like maybe I'd be invited to a panel someday. So here I am. Thank you.
Yay. Mike, Pat, and Dan have come together to talk about how their creativity expands, and we are lucky enough to be here to enjoy this conversation. Thank you again, Pat, for hosting, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, George. First of all, I want to say how things expand. This is like a deep dive. This is a plunge. This is an explosion. I think when you go to graphic novels, it's shocking and surprising to me. But I want to say, Dan, if you haven't physically been to Highlights, this is part of what you have to put on your calendar, okay?
Because I'm on my virtual cabin in the woods right now.
Yeah, this is not the time, but the buffets alone, you know, I should not go into the food.
Someday.
Yeah, it's worth doing. But also, you know, I just want to add to what George was saying, that they make some really wonderful scholarships available to people, and that's what all the funding helps with, you know, so it's really a good thing to give to. I do want to talk to these guys because I'm going to tell you, I ran into you like up at the Eric Carle Museum a couple of years ago when Leo and Diane Dillon's exhibit was on, and you had just started working on this graphic novel. And I remember walking away thinking, what is he thinking? You know, because it's so much work. And I have students who are interested in doing graphic novels, and I don't know that anybody really knows how much it is until they actually jump in and get working on it, right? I mean, you know. I've got two students I know who are actually working on it, you know, out of school. Betsy Peterschmidt and Dave Kopp are actually working on it. But most students don't really have a concept of how much work is involved and how long the process is going to be, you know. But I was just generally curious about it because it's one of those things that I know I will never, ever, ever do. It's too much. And I think
you're a smart person, Pat.
That you're supposed to be in love. We're going to talk about how you're in love with this process. I'm thinking that the audience is either thinking about doing one, or they're deeply in the middle of doing one and realizing now how long it is, or they already have one under their belt. But I definitely wanted to talk to you guys because I want to, Allison, would you show the video? This is how I know you've arrived in children's books. Can you put the, my PowerPoint, of course, is not working there. This is how you have arrived. When you have plush toys. Once you get to the plush toy level, you've made it, you know, you are an icon. And Beagle and Little Elliot have become iconic characters. So I do want to talk a little bit about your picture books, obviously, because that's where you came from. And I'm assuming a lot of the sensibilities carried over. But to me, going into a graphic novel is like a leap from picture books to novels. you're really, it's like a huge full-blown story. But can you go to the next slide? This is what I wanted to say. This is why these two guys really, I felt would be excellent to talk about this, not just because they're doing graphic novels, but in terms of the way that they can teach and articulate what's coming from their work and what they're doing. A lot of people I find do beautiful work, but they won't necessarily be able to break it down and tell you, this is how I got there. Dan, without your knowledge probably, I've been using this image of yours in my class for years to talk about making a strong promotional piece, even if this wasn't done for that purpose. I found this is from the Guild of Geniuses, right? And was this your first book?
It was my first book. I met Arthur Levine at a SCBWI conference, and he gave me a 2-book deal at like my first SCBWI conference. So
it's like everybody's.
I don't have one of those like struggle stories of rejection for months and months and years, but I think that's why I hold SCBWI so close to my heart. It was just because it was just the best means of getting to know people in the industry and getting the help I needed.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Like that's, yeah.
And that's what can happen for some people. And I think that's kind of like the brass ring that everybody dreams about grabbing when they go to one of those conferences,
Right.
But this piece I really talk to students about because you have a little bit of everything in here that I think would make a really compelling promotional piece. There's action, there's drama, there's interesting lighting, interesting color, and interesting perspective and scale. And something is about to happen, And that's
so was the piece that Macy's saw that I got the job to do the 2006 Macy's Day Parade poster.
Wow.
Yeah, it was also my very first published piece. Like it was always a dream of mine to get into communication arts, and that was like my first piece to get into communication arts.
You nailed it. Okay. And can you go to the next slide down? This is the reason that I was thinking about talking to Mike. You came to Mike and kind of, this was, I don't know how many years ago that was, but you showed like your original drawing and then went through all these different steps to how you got to this full color piece, and with a combination that Chandra Strickland calls what did she say? Tradigital. I think we gotta just. It's hard to say, but it's so on point. This combination of traditional drawing and then applying the digital on top of it. And so aside from blowing the minds of my students, I went home and I said, I can do that. Okay. The thing I love about this community is like we do learn from each other. It's never going to be. You're never going to do, I don't want to break anybody's heart. You're never going to do a Dan Santat. You're never going to do a Mike Curato. But you take some of those techniques away. And that's why I put that link up there, because you actually break it down.
Oh, that's
how
nice.
do I get to the finish point?
Yeah.
That's very cool.
I like to call it digital glazing. That's my nerdy term.
Okay, digital glazing. But I know I took that home and I said I could do that. And I did a couple of pieces doing, the combination. It ain't that easy, but it's also fabulous. It's a fabulous approach. I want you to go through some of your books, and you guys just tell us a little bit about them. But I think it's a really good setup for that transition to what you're doing in your graphic novels, because a lot of the elements in your books, obviously, your sensibilities, you're carrying into your graphic novels. So, Allison, take it away. Just want to see these books just so people have a slight oeuvre if they're not already familiar with your work. This is the Little Elliot Dynasty. And you can tell us about how that can, you know what, Mike, when you first did that, and you told me it had been translated into 10 different languages, and you were doing the cover for each one because it was in different languages, I thought, oh my God, what a work ethic. Because I know they would have given you somebody to like do it for you, but you wanted to.
You did all the foreign language versions?
Well, yeah. So I had the foresight at least to keep the type separate from the background, but there was, I will not say which, but the first foreign published big city, they sent me their own version. They're like, what do you think? And I was like, what if I just did it for you? And then we just had to keep going because I just want it to look right. Anyway, no shade. All tea, no shade. Yeah, and now we're at like language number 14 or something like that. So that's cool. With Big City anyway, not for all of them, but
Yeah.
and
So
and
you
I
speak
got
14 languages now.
what's that?
You speak 14 languages now.
Claro que sí. My bookshelf does anyway, but yeah, so the quick story on this is I also got my start through SCBWI, although I didn't get my start till like 10 years after college, but I went to my first New York conference and submitted my portfolio, which was very Eliot heavy. And that's how I got the attention of my publisher and my agent. I've been working on all these books.
Well, is there another Elliot coming? Do we have another one?
Not as yet. I've got other things in the hopper, so we shall see.
Okay. All right, Allison, next.
Yeah, Wormless Worm. This is written by J.J. Austrian. Fastest book project I've ever done. I think I illustrated it in like a month and a half.
Wow.
Very simple because there were no backgrounds, so it was very character focused. But this.
Okay. Next one.
Mike
I
freeze.
think Mike froze.
Froze,
So
huh?
might have to reboot.
Oh no.
Oh, Mike froze. Oh no, we've lost him.
Well, if I could just make a comment, I loved the flowered dragon that was in this book. It was gorgeous. Like he was really playing with a lot of mixed media, and he was using a lot. He was integrating scanned images and photography.
Mm-hmm.
It was very good. It's very seamless. Like you can see in the origami Pegasus. I guess that's what it was. But he integrates it very well. It's very balanced. Yeah, but the flower dragon, I remember seeing the flower dragon. I think he used like a daisy to make the eye and everything. It was solid. It was, yeah. I mean, I think as artists go, a lot of us like to, as much as it's nice to get, like praise from publishers, there's also a great thing as an artist on a personal level where you see your work evolve into another stage. It might not be something that you think is better or worse or whatever, but definitely something where you look at your work and you say, it's nice to know that I'm not just kind of being stagnant and just doing the same work over and over again. Because I remember getting into that point where I was doing work digitally for years and years and years and just getting really bored with the process of making books. Like that's actually a thing over time.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I actually reverted back to going back to traditional medium and then integrating that with digital work and, came out with something like Drawn Together. And that was like, for me, I was just so proud of it because I wasn't doing the same thing and I had evolved into something else. And sometimes that's all you really need to just kind of feel whole again.
In fact, Allison, can we just go ahead to like until Mike gets back? Can we go ahead to like dance books?
Okay. So The Adventures of Beagle. This was a book. It's a metaphor about the birth of my son. I was expecting to be a parent for the first time, and there's just a lot of anxiety as a parent. Expecting like, well, what's going to happen? Am I going to be a good father? And this whole feeling of like an unconditional love, like you're going to meet this person for the first time, but that person is perfect. But throughout the entire book, Beagle is this character wondering if there's a child there out in the world who can imagine him. So the whole book is the anticipation of meeting this person for the first time. And then when they finally meet, you find out that this book is actually made by the girl who imagines him. And so that's how you come to the conclusion that they were perfect for each other.
So what's your son's reaction to being the inspiration behind this classic and the
it's a lot of awkward stares, like I love you too. But it's a weird thing, and it's a weird thing to read. I don't know. It's a weird thing to read books to my kids that I've written for them. my kids might come up and be like, hey, let's read Wimpy Kid. And then, I can't come in and be like, no, I've got something better. Like, I can't do that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, even if I'm doing a presentation about Beagle or about, Are We There Yet, which was about my younger son, I think they get really embarrassed. They have a hard time being in the
Sure.
same room. They're just like, oh, I'm gonna be outside,
Yeah. This will pass. There'll come a time when they're proud of it again. You know what I mean? Really
Sure,
like.
sure. Yeah.
But did you feel you had to do one for your other son after this? I mean,
Well,
like.
yeah, you don't want your younger son to have a complex. Like, hey, Dad, remember that time you wrote
Oh,
that book
yeah.
about my big brother? And well,
Yeah. What about me, Dad? What about
me, Dad? What about my needs?
Okay, Allison, can we see the next one? Don't tell me we've lost Mike. Ooh, cool.
So this one, what I discovered about myself is that I do my best work when I'm inspired by family, by feelings deep inside. So this one is about the recovery from trauma. And so as the nursery rhyme Humpty Dumpty went, I was never a huge fan of just like, well, there was this egg, sat on a wall, he fell, the end. And I always thought, well, what if he was able to recover from that fall? And, naturally he has this fear of heights. And then this story is actually a love letter to my wife, who's had an entire life of anxiety and depression. And to a point where it actually affected our marriage to a certain extent. And then also with family practices, just taking care of the kids, like it was just constantly just being down and just being stressed out about everything, feeling like there's danger around every corner.
Mm-hmm.
And then she finally got to a point where she decided to go find help for herself. And when that happened, like it was like the clouds parted and she became a completely different person.
Mm-hmm.
So this book is about, overcoming that anxiety and being able to move on.
That's fabulous. I find some of the, or not some of, but like the most moving books and the most memorable books come from your own experience,
Right.
Really close to you.
A muse, if you will. Yeah.
A muse, yes. But to be able to turn it into something like this is pretty incredible, and it's so positive. And there's so many other people and so many kids who read this and take away that message. If the message isn't there, you haven't got a story. You know?
Actually, right now, the sales of this book have been very good.
I can imagine.
Like, a lot of people have been using this book for.
I can imagine with all that everybody's going through. This is crazy. Everybody's feeling kind of stuck inside and.
I know.
After the fall, well, except for we're not after yet. We haven't got to the after yet. Can you show the next one?
This is a story that I wish I had written. Being Asian American, I've never. In the 15 years of my being in the business of children's publishing, I'd never had the opportunity to write a book about my own culture. I didn't really know what to say. I didn't know how to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some authors who are just very good about embracing their heritage. Like Grace Lynn's very good about embracing their heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Gene Yang's very good about embracing his heritage. Whereas I came from a place where, I couldn't even speak the language. I've only been to Thailand once. I kind of don't know my relatives because I've only been to Thailand once. And so, Min Lei wrote this book and it just spoke to my heart. And so, it was something where, the grandson and the grandfather, they couldn't speak the same language, but they do find an understanding with one another through art and
Mm-hmm.
cultural differences. And, I was honored. I was honored to work on this.
That's gorgeous. It's fabulous. So have you guys done presentations together?
I'm sorry?
Have you gone out and done presentations together?
We have, we, one of the first times we met was at ALA in Florida a few years back. And then we had the National Book Festival. Funny, like we actually have a mutual friend in Hawaii that we we didn't realize that we knew. I mean, if any of you out there who's watching this presentation, if you ever have the opportunity to work with Min Lei, he's such an effective writer for illustrators because he has this ability to write, but then leave plenty of space for the illustrator to flex their weight and really let it shine. So he's an outstanding person to work with. That's
kind of like one of the golden rules in picture books is to leave the room, for the imagination.
Right.
So it's great. Show another one? One more. Yes.
This is my next book with Min. It just came out about 3 weeks ago. Outstanding concept. Just a story where it's the idea about a girl who loves to press elevator buttons. And, and her and her little brother in competition about who gets to press the elevator button. And I remember reading the concept about this little girl finding a broken elevator button, taping it on her door. Her closet door, being able to press it, and then the closet door turns into these magical worlds. And it was just such a great concept. I was a little angry at Min because it was just like, how come I didn't think of this? This is such a good idea. And I wish I had seen it. I wish I had seen it in my mind because it just seems so obvious. And that's when you come across a really good idea, when you kind of look at something. Even Min and I had this discussion where you saw the idea and you're like, how come no one wrote this yet? Like, this is such a good idea. And so I was very on. And I remember the manuscript was only like, the actual text that's in the book, only like 150 words. And a lot of it was very narrative heavy about what happens in the story. And so, the ability to do this as a picture book really lends itself not very far from becoming a picture book, becoming a graphic novel. I'll put some samples, but yeah, it's not that far off.
I can see that. It's good, The thing about the idea itself is that we've all been on elevators with little kids who want to push the button,
Right.
And so you're right. All these ideas that are around you all the time, and who picks up on them? I never understand when people say, well, I don't know what to write about. 750,000 stories.
Mike, you're back, pal?
Is Mike back?
I'm back.
Okay, all right. Yeah,
He's on the road.
My internet went out in my area. Can you believe that?
Oh no.
So
okay.
I'm on my cell phone now and running around my house trying to set up my tripod.
This is good. We're getting a tour.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
We get
Never a dull moment. Can you see me even? I don't even.
Yeah. No, we see fine.
The green room, the blue room. Very cool. Yeah, we were taking a look at Dan's work. Dan, Mike is giving you a little bit of a run for your money as the hardest working man in showbiz, the hardest working man in children's books anyway, because you've done like 60 or something,
Is that right? Is that how many you've done?
You, Dan, you, yes.
So let's see. Actually, when Fam and I, we get together and sometimes we'll get together for coffee and talk about how crazy we are. Just, I think combined, Win and I have almost 300 books together. And I think for me, my my list of books that I've done, I've crossed 100 book threshold.
Okay.
If you go on Goodreads, some of the books, like they flip in, they flip out on the list, but I'm somewhere around 120.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good Lord. See, Mike, this is what's ahead. Now that you've got your internet back, oh my God. You're catching up with all those badges. All right. So
Wi-Fi badge.
You need a badge for that, okay, for that many books. You need a badge. Mike, we're going to go back and take a look at some of your books real quick, and then we'll talk, because we got to get to the graphic novel thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Allison, is it possible to go back to like Mike's right after Little Elliot and right after
it looks a lot like we're having internet gremlins all over, because Allison just texted me that her screen froze. So maybe we can just talk about
okay, we can move on.
Little Elliots and move from there if you can remember your slides, and I'm going to try to get them up, Pat.
That's okay, because I want to talk to you guys about graphic novels. And Mike, you had some stuff to show us, right? Because that transition, first of all, I just want you to say, what on earth were you thinking when you decided to jump into a graphic novel? And did you know what a challenge it was going to be. Can you
Sorry,
hear-
I cut out there. Are you asking me a question?
Yes, I was. Oh my
Sorry.
goodness. This is the age of technology. We are, you know what I mean? And this happens all the time. I've had school visits. Apparently kids can actually bomb Zoom. They know how to do it, you know, so you have to there's always something going on. What I was asking was your first graphic novel. Why on earth did you make that leap? And can you show us anything from it?
Yeah, so this is the advanced copy right here. Ta-da! It's, you know, it's a few pages long. So this was an idea I had many years ago, maybe like 2010 or 11. I had the idea for this book, and I started writing it in like 2011, and didn't really get really into it until like 2012 or 13, and we sold it in 2014, and then I had all these other projects to work on, so I just started illustrating it like 2 years ago, and now it's coming out in September. So, but this is a really personal book for me. It is fiction, but it's very much based on a lot of life experiences I had as a teenager, and it was just something that I had to get out of me. Like I had to write this story.
And you knew it wouldn't be, well, of course it couldn't be a picture book. When you said writing it though, were you writing it as a novel and then thought,
no, I knew this would be, I always knew this would be a graphic novel. It's very much because of the age group that it's written for. Like comic books really saved me in many ways as a teenager, not just as a reader, but also just as a person. I needed them. And so I knew I had to tell this story through that medium.
Okay, and was it the same for you, Dan? I mean, was this like a story that you just had to tell? Your first one?
You know, I grew up on comics, you know, starting with like the Sunday comics like Garfield and Peanuts. And then, you know, I was a real big movie junkie and TV junkie. So the whole transition from comics to cartoons to picture books, I mean, for me, picture books felt like, oh, it's just like a smaller comic. Like,
whoa.
You know, if you were to take, yeah, it's kind of a reverse thinking. Like if you were to take an Elephant and Piggy book, like Mo Willems' Elephant and Piggy book, I mean, it's basically like a comic, but the panels are just, you're turning the page per panel, per panel, per panel, but they're having a sequence of discussions. You know, so for me, like the idea, I think I was always passionate about the idea of doing comics, but kind of being able to imbibe, you know, a medium that was within 40 pages just felt manageable for me. But you know, my second book published was Sidekick, was a graphic novel that took me 7 years. But I would say of the 7 years, 3 of those years, it was a learning curve of making just every mistake you could possibly think of. And then from there, the next 4 years was kind of just starting from a clean slate. Also juggling multiple projects at the same time. Like if I had nothing else on my plate and I just had to focus on the graphic novel, I could probably get one done in 1.5 years or 2 years. Like if there was just nothing else going on. And I don't know about Mike's view about accomplishing and finishing a graphic novel, but for me, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like climbing a mountain. Like not many people do it, but when you finally achieve the summit and you get to the top, you're really proud of yourself. And I'm kind of at a point where it's like, all right, well, that was a rush. Where's the next mountain? Like, I think you kind of get addicted. You get hooked to it. Like you want to do another one. So like currently I'm working on, you know, 2-3 others, one of which is my own memoir. And so, but I mean, you know, you have your fiction, you have your nonfiction, and, you know, and as a market's growing, you know, it used to be that there was only graphics and First Second. And now, you know, Random House just started their own imprint. HarperCollins just started their own. Like it's really on the move. It's really exciting.
And they're getting younger too, aren't they? I mean, are there the graphic novels going for like younger audience?
Depends on. I think it depends on who you're looking at. I think if you're keeping an eye on certain publishers, you find that they're kind of trying to zoom in on like what market they can kind of grab a hold of. So like if you look at graphics, they definitely want to read to a younger audience. Whereas like if you go to first, second, you know. They're doing older, I would say, like probably bordering on like older middle grade to YA, and definitely just a passion for like beautiful French comics and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think it really depends on who's running the publication, and you know, you'll see in another 5 years where we're all at. But I mean, it's an exciting time for comics and children's publishing.
Okay, well, I want to ask a couple questions before we take a look at the work up close, right? Because in terms of getting started, literally, do you actually just start sitting down writing the story, or do you take a sketchbook out and actually doodle as you go? Or what, you know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, do you really start fleshing it out with pictures from the start? Or, because I have no idea how you figure out, is it like a set format? Is it always going to be like 90 pages or whatever? Or is it just as long as it is? And you just go stories.
Start, Mike?
Either one.
Did you have a presentation? Did you have a thing that you
Mike, I've got your stuff ready to roll when you tell me.
Look at that.
Okay, and then you just chime in whenever, you know.
Oh, Mike first?
Whoever wants to go first. Mike? Yeah, who's queued up, George?
Let's try it.
Okay.
Does anybody see Mike's presentation?
I just want to make sure he has his stuff.
I think I see. Okay, yeah. Everyone sees the really boring looking type stuff. Okay, so I actually started, you know, I think, first of all, to answer your question really quickly, I think, oh, hold on, let's just stay on that page for now. Sure. Thanks. I think every book is going to be different how you approach it, no matter what kind of book you're making, picture book or graphic novel. There's going to be some degrees of difference. But for me, when I work on a picture book, I usually start with art and then write about the art and then go back and forth. Mm-hmm. For this, it was very different. I did sit down and I wrote. So it was mostly just like thinking of things I wanted to write about. And you can see on the top left, that's like, I used a Google spreadsheet. I created like my story arc using a spreadsheet. So I would just kind of plunk in different ideas that I wanted to write about. And then the book is divided into 7 days as chapters. So you can see each column is a different chapter. And then I would kind of plug in things that I wanted to talk about. And because summer camp is like, has a schedule, it was nice to have that kind of structure. Mm-hmm. So like he's always in these 3 merit badge classes each weekday and things like that. So it kind of helped me create a structure. And then on the right, you can see the script that I wrote, which isn't technically the way you're supposed to do it. Like I've seen them laid out kind of like movie scripts. So that's not the technical way of doing it, but that's how I did it. And then the next page, you can see I did a sample. See, did it turn yet? Can you go to the next page?
There you go. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. So so I sent the script and a few sample pages of art and like a sample cover to the publisher. And with the caveat that I knew that this wasn't the final art style, I wanted it to be, it just didn't feel right yet. And then I realized like, oh, it needs to be a little looser and reflect more of the feeling of rawness. So if you go to the next page, you can see the sample art on the top and the final art on the bottom.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in this case, the actual content didn't really change for this spread, but you can see how the art style really changed.
Just curious, why did you choose the other art style over what you presented?
I wanted something that had a little more grit to it. Like I really wanted a rougher line because there's a lot of the book that's really so raw. And the top felt too delicate to me.
Got it.
So yeah, and then if you flip to the next slide, it's you know, I started working on character sketches and at the same time experimenting with the style, just trying to get what I was looking for. You can go to the next one.
Wow.
So I kept trying different styles, different mediums, experimenting with the character. Like, it was hard for me to nail down like a 14-year-old kid because it's such a transitional age where some 14-year-olds look grown and some of them look like they're 5. Like, it's really kind of tricky to find that kind of representation. So we go to the next slide. Yeah, so you can see my notes here. It says like combination cartoony and sketchy, rough, some modeling, crossroad between child and adult. So I wanted the art to kind of reflect all of that. So the next slide. So you can see on the left, this is like, I'm winding down towards the end to figure out the style. And the final style's on the right, which is a black color pencil with ink washes. And that's what worked for me.
Why the selective use of color?
What's that?
You only use color occasionally. Why the selective use like that?
I do. So that was to highlight, so the name of the book is Flamer. And so any instances of fire, like fire is a visual thread throughout the book, that's in color. Or other things do appear in like red or orange that have some kind of visual significance that I really want people to take note of. So yeah, that was how I wanted to approach things.
Okay.
And I'm that poor kid in the lower right.
Oh, getting the nibblies. That's camp life, man. That's like teenage kid life.
Oh, it's horrible.
Next slide. Let's see what's it.
It's so real.
I know. See, wrong, I'm telling you. So this is where I began. So I had the script. And I remember talking to Jenny Holm, just being like, how do you even do this? Like, she and Craig Thompson, I saw them both at a book reading, and after their reading, I was talking to them, and they're like, oh, check this out. And they were like, you literally have to thumbnail every single page. So I bought this giant sketchbook, and I did thumbnail out every page, every panel, to figure out the sequence. And I left really wide margins, you can see on the right-hand side, so that I could like adapt and make changes if I needed to. And then I would hand those off to my assistant, who would recreate those panel layouts in InDesign for me. And then if you go to the next slide, we would print out those pages, so you can see on the right-hand side, so that I would have my panels all set for me. And then I got to make a more detailed comp. And that picture on the left is the stack of all the comps that I sketched out before I went to final. So this was really invaluable because as a designer, even, I could not wrap my head around how to make space, how to leave space for the type. It was really messing with me. And so we were able to lay the type out in this, comp mock-up. And then I discovered like there were many pages where there wasn't enough room in the panels for the type. So I added something like 30 pages to the whole book just to make room to fit type and like kind of expand out parts that needed more visual explanation, room for the words. And then the next slide, you can see the whole process for one spread. So the top left is the thumbnail, the top right is the comps, and then the bottom left is what I handed off, well, almost what I handed off to the publisher, but You can see, first of all, you can see I made some changes to the left-hand page. I decided to kind of break that larger scene out into smaller parts. But the artwork is pretty much final. And then you can see the bottom right, we actually got to hire an amazing typographer, John Martz, to turn my handwriting into a font, which I know Dan, you've gotten to have that done too, which is awesome. And my designer was Colleen A.F. Venable, who is amazing and who wrote Kiss Number 8. So she's got a lot of graphic novel background, but she drew all of the word bubbles digitally. So that's how we got around that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just like rushing through so we have enough time. So the next slide is, here's a sample of the font. Which I have no clever name for yet, but working on it.
Curato works.
And the next one. Okay, so here's like, this is one of the first finished pieces that I made that I did over and over and over. So you can see one of the experiments on the left, and the middle was kind of refining that in Photoshop, and then the right is the actual final. So you can see how a bunch of things changed.
Okay, the bunny stays the same.
Yeah,
the bunny stays the same.
Bunny stays the same, moves around a little bit.
Got it.
Yeah, and then the next one, let's see, now I've just got a few kind of, so the left and the middle are like practice, and the right is the finish. Then the next slide, there's more of the same. And just a note on the fire. So basically I drew everything in black and white, right? And all the ink washes black and white, and the fire I did on separate layers, using different textures and masks sometimes, but all that's hand painted as well, with different effects in Photoshop. And then the next slide. That's the concept in the top and the finish on the bottom.
That's gorgeous.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's one of my favorites from the spread, and I think one of the most powerful images. Trouble sleeping. Next slide. And here's like cover journey. So you recognize the top left is the original cover concept, and we didn't stray too far from that, right? So I went through a bunch of different thumbnail ideas, and then that 1A is kind of variation that we stuck with. If you go to the next slide, there was a lot of debate with me and the art team and the editorial team and the sales team as to like whether or not to include the uniform, and we decided to go simple, so that it would maybe have more mass appeal, instead of someone being like, oh, I was in the Boy Scouts, I want to read this. It's more like, oh, this is a book about a kid, which is, more the point. So then if you go to the next one, we refined even further. The top left still didn't feel right, like it felt really flat. And then the final cover feels right to me, like, and when you read the book, it makes more sense that he's actually engulfed in flames.
Ouch.
Plus, it just looks cooler.
It is.
And then I think there's another one. Are those all the slides?
That's it.
Okay, good. We'll tell you what, let's go to Dan, because we have some time for questions at the end. So if anybody has questions about that, because that was one of the questions I had, was how on earth you get to the cover. And I'm glad you showed that, because there's 752,000 variations on a theme sometimes before you get to the final one. Dan, can you show us some of yours?
I will share. So let me know if you see that.
Yes.
So yeah, so the transition from a picture book to a graphic novel, I don't think is a huge leap. So here we have this book Lift, which is, like I said, very visually heavy, a lot of narrative panels, And, you know, sometimes, you know, doing a sequence of images can probably make the story a little bit more interesting rather than saying, you know, what is going on. So like in this case, again, and this goes back to what I was saying about how great it is to work with men, there's this balance, almost kind of like figure skating couples where, you know, one is complementing the other, but you're not stepping on each other's toes. So it could easily be narrated as, you know, Mike saying, men saying, you know, oh, she took the doorbell, you know, she took the button out of her pocket, taped it to the door, pressed the button, magic door open, you know. But there's also a magic in just showing that in illustration sequentially, and allowing the visual vocabulary to kind of emote that scene. And again, going back to doing Elephant and Piggy with Mo Willems, you know, we're not really that far off from doing a comic. It's just rather than panels, you're just turning the pages, and each page spread turns into a panel. So here we have this discussion between Elephant and Piggy, Harold and Hog, you know, just having a conversation, and it just continues on and on and on. So if you're comfortable doing something like this, then I don't see it being that far off from moving on doing a graphic novel. I think, so back in the day, some of you online might know who Kazuki Buishi is, who did the Amulet graphic novels for Scholastic. So back in the day, before we were all published, we would all hang out on his Bolt City message board. It was like me, Raina Telgemeier, a whole bunch of people, just kind of like hoping like, oh, someday people are going to read our stuff, you know? And, you know, here we are years later, just kind of in the middle of it all. And then really it's just a matter of just doing it. But what we used to have like this 1 month activity where we would just do one page comics. Just take a piece of paper, make a comic. You can have as many panels as you want. It could be a single panel, it could be 20 panels, but just see if it fits on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And that's just a really great exercise that you just do every month. And like, once you get your first one under your belt, the next one just gets easier and easier and easier. And just to have it in one page just makes it feel a little bit more manageable. Now, I'm very much like Mike, where you know, I would write the story, but I like printing it out and just having a tangible, you know, outline or you know, script just to have handy. And my process is pretty similar. And I'm gonna take away from my first graphic novel, Sidekicks, which came out in like 2010 or something like that. And this was a 7-year process, like I said, because I made a lot of mistakes. My first dive into it, I just started drawing and writing while I was just making the comic while I was going along. And by the end, it turned into be 500 pages, and it took me a year of my life.
So is it different now? I mean, do you plot everything before you start anything?
I'll show you that right now.
Oh, okay.
So now I heavily outline. Now I break them into chapters, but there's really no chapters in my graphic novels. But what I like to do is I'll break them up because it gives you an opportunity to pace it out as the story goes along. And you have like these little bite-sized moments where, you know, you end each chapter kind of like on a cliffhanger, or a moment where the reader will be asking more questions like, well, what about this? What about this? And so it's invaluable for pacing. And so like currently, like right now, I'm working on a memoir about it was a summer of 1989. And I'm writing a memoir about the first time I ever fell in love with a girl. And I was on a bus with all these girls from my junior high school. And each chapter is broken up into all the different countries that we've gone to. So, you know, it's Paris, it's Switzerland, it's Austria, things like that. It just makes it more manageable, but it also allows you to kind of hone in on a certain point of that larger piece of work that seems manageable. And you can still like be laser focused and make sure that portion is interesting. So for me, like the most important part of this is the outline. You have to make a story that is interesting to the editor. And, you know, I'll send this into the editor and say, is this something worth your time? You know, and for me, from what I've learned is you kind of have to bring it to the editor's playing field where, you know, something that they understand, like, oh, I understand reading an outline. I understand if this is up my alley or not, if this is a story worth telling. So I'll spend a good amount of time. And I've gotten to a point now where if I look at the size of an outline, I can tell roughly how long the graphic novel is going to be. But when I make a graphic novel, I don't set myself on any particular number. The story's done when the story's done. Like, it may take more pages, may take fewer pages. A lot of that can always be broadened or can be shortened by how well you panel your comic.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, I do my outline, and then like Mike, I write a script. And so you know, just it's from I took a storyboarding class in art school, and basically you take sequences from scenes from like Hitchcock movies or whatever, and then you would storyboard it out, just say like, oh, this is how I would shoot that particular scene. You know, in 2007, I had a cartoon show on Disney Channel called The Replacements, and I learned a tremendous amount from storyboard artists where you would get an 11-minute episode, and then you'd break up 3 or 4 minute chunks and give them out to different storyboard artists, and then they would storyboard their particular scene. And you were just focused on that one window. You were just focused on the TV screen. You know, what would be in the TV screen at that moment. And so wrote the script, went back and forth with the editor about the dialogue and whether it was good to go into sketches. And then once the dialogue is set and it's okay, then I would just take each line and then I would draw a little panel of what you would see in that little piece of dialogue. Not even thinking about how I was going to panel things. I was just creating panels. I was just saying, this image, this image, this image. So you're going from script to visual representation of the dialogue. And then the next step after that, you just have a big pile of panels. And then it turns into, okay, well, how am I going to arrange these panels into graphic novel pages? And then that's where you start doing the thumbnail sketches. And so you can pace it out a lot easier if you just have your basket of panels and then realize, okay, I can have 3 panels here, 4 panels here, because the last panel leaves for a nice breathing moment for a page turn. You know, if you think it's more comfortable to have 10 panels on a 2-page spread, then you can rearrange it so that you can fit 10 panels on a 2-page spread for that more appealing page turn. So it's a different way of looking at it, and you know, and it's different for every artist. You know, I tend to feel more comfortable with a pacing about 7 or 8 panels per spread. I've seen some people that manage to shove 20, 30 panels into a 2-page spread, but they're so good at their design that it reads beautifully. You know, so it depends on how you feel about it, but. You know, I'll thumbnail out all the panels and I'll break them up into each chapter. And then now you're getting kind of a better sense of how big, you know, the book's going to be. And, you know, like with Sidekicks, you know, there's action sequences because it has superhero house pets. And it's one of those cases where if you know there's going to be a fight scene, that's when like everything just gets revved up and you just start gobbling up spreads. Like I think the last 50 pages of that graphic novel is just action sequences. Like it just starts, because the more panels you add, the more you're kind of breaking into a little moment of time. And so in my graphic novel, the note probably said fight sequence, but like the heroes win in the end. It just turned into a big monster. So here I'm shifting gears a little bit because I have these thumbnails, but then what I'll do is I'll just take those thumbnails and then I'll blow them up into the format that we work in. So for example, in Scholastic, they like using a 9x6 format. So I would literally take the thumbnail sketch and I would just stretch it out to 9x6. And then I start putting in text. I start putting in text to see where it fits. And at this point, I'm not even using my font. I'm just handwriting the dialogue in just for placement, just purely for placement. And so here's a sequence for this graphic novel I'm working on right now called The Aquanaut, which right now has been taking me 10 years because I've just been juggling with like so many other projects in my life that I just keep shoving my own projects aside. So here we have just a short little 6-page sequence, 7-8-page sequence, putting in my onomatopoeia, you know, leaving that on a separate layer, knowing that I want to draw through the entire thing so that I can lay things on top of that and move it wherever I feel like it might be better placed. Just really loose details, like this character here, he, you know, I'm just sketching in a beard, but you know, that's for the editor to understand, like, oh, he has a beard. Even then, sometimes I'm not even drawing this detail. This is probably a little bit more detailed than I would normally do for a thumbnail. You know, sometimes I'll tint a page just so I can separate the values, so I know that it's you know, hands over water holding a bottle. And then once that gets approved, then I just go straight into inking. I'm not using any paper because I'm a slob and my wife would just lose her mind if there was just paper everywhere, you know. So I just do everything on a computer. It's easier to do changes. And in my file, you'll see envelopes, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4, specifically for page 56 or 57. And so I actually learned this technique from a friend, like just ink 2 pages a day before you start your day. And before you know it, you'll get this thing done. You know, it's kind of a thing where when you're working on graphic novels, I feel like you really have to dedicate your life to the graphic novel to get it done. I don't have that luxury, so I've forced myself to make that time for myself. So here I am, I'm just going in and I'm doing the line work. And this line work here, it's like evolved a lot since Sidekicks. Like in the last, you know, 10, 15 years, my style has changed. I'm more aggressive with just working with a direct line quality. You know, sometimes onomatopoeia, you're working into the artwork. So I have, you know, the word crash like behind his head, things like that. And so here the ship's going down and he's stuck with the bottle in his hand and he gets sucked under the water. And then, so now here's the next sequence known as flatting. And basically you're just blocking in colors. I'm not doing highlights. I'm not doing shadows. I'm just blocking in colors. And so when I worked on Sidekicks, I actually, this is before like Dropbox and things like that. I actually hired people, you know, I went on social media and said, anybody want to help me block in colors for my graphic novel? I'll pay you, you know, I'll pay you per page. And, you know, I had like 5 or 6 friends that agreed. One person as far out as Czechoslovakia. And then I would just put a number of files into, you know, an online folder, and then they would just pluck it out. And I left some color keys, and they would just block in colors and leave everything in layers, drop it back in. And I would just pay everybody by PayPal. So like, you know, Czechoslovakia, like I'm paying in their currency. And that saved a tremendous amount of time. In this case, because we are in the age of coronavirus, like I've had nothing but time to work on this, so I've just been coloring it myself. And so these go really quickly, but again, like I think I'm blocking in maybe 4 or 5 pages a day.
Wow. Do you give yourself a pacing? I mean, do you assign yourself that pacing, or is it just happens?
I have to, because I'll get complacent and I'll have to work on other projects. I very easily will set my own work aside to focus on other deadlines. So I kind of have to put a restriction on myself and say, no, you have to work on your own stuff.
Yeah.
So here's an example of a page that I blocked in, and then I'll go in on another pass where I'm putting in highlights and shadows. So what will be a flatted page per se will turn into this. And so this, you know, varies from, I think I did this in about an hour, maybe 2 hours of just the blocking in, the flatting part is the hardest part of the project. It's the most time consuming process. Here's an example from Sidekicks. I had you know, the sketch phase, and here I'm showing you the flatting for this. And I think here on the right page, I think I was done flatting the page. And then here you'll see me starting to put in the shadows and the highlights. And then, you know, I guess the other effects like the smoke and things like that.
Mhm.
And I remember just to hit my deadline. So here on the right, you'll see all the pages just for chapter 1. And I just remember, you know, there gets to a point where it becomes real and the publisher says, okay, well, now you have this deadline. And then you're like, okay, well, I know I have about 219 pages. Now I have to budget and see how many spreads I have to get done a day in order to hit this deadline.
And for both of you guys, so when you're doing a page like the previous one and you've got all those images on the right, are you doing that as like one, is that on your screen as one thing, or are you doing each little block separately and then dropping it in?
Oh no, I'll work on a spread that has multiple panels, and I'll work on it.
Okay.
Yeah, and because sometimes at the 11th hour they might say, well, this isn't reading well, and then you might actually have to take that entire panel and move it around. Like I've had a couple of cases like that. Here I have a color key, and I'll just drop in color keys for people to block in color so they understand how it is uniform. Here's some final art from Aquanaut, and it's different from Sidekicks, but it's still I'm working in some watercolor textures into there. This is a spread from Sidekicks, different, you know, it's different. And here's some, for those of you out there who want to get a better understanding of graphic novels, here's some books that I recommend. This is Will Eisner's Graphic Storytelling. Making Comics, anything by Scott McCloud is invaluable. Understanding Comics, which I actually think is probably a better book. But yeah, that's
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I know we're a little bit over time. I still want to leave some time for questions and not ask so many myself. I just want to say I really appreciate the concept of Garfield and Peanuts as sort of gateway comics. You know, you can get hooked on them, and this is what can happen to you. You know, but I'll let Allison take it away because she's got some questions backed up, I'm sure.
Yes, we do have a lot of questions. First of all, thank you so much. This has been just fabulous, a fabulous hour. Dan, you just ended by talking a little bit about Will Eisner and Scott McCloud, but some of the other questions that have come through in the Q&A have to do with kind of understanding the actual digital aspect, Photoshop, Wacom tablets. So Mike and Dan, could you talk just a little bit more about digitally what exactly you're using to produce the work?
Mike?
Yeah, I am using a Wacom tablet and stylus and Photoshop. That's the digital. That's it. That's all the digital stuff I use.
Do you make your own brushes? Are you making your own brushes?
No, but I don't. I'm not coloring like Dan is, so you know, it's not like I'm painting in mine. If anything, I'm just going in and refining, like cleaning things up in Photoshop, and then it's more the flames that has like all the special effects and stuff like that. So like creating the masks in Photoshop and adding different layer effects. Yeah.
For me, I use Photoshop. I use Word. I use Dropbox. Like I'll drop all my files into Dropbox and I'll share it with my editor and art director, and then we can just go back and forth. And now I'm actually like delivering like layered files right into Dropbox for them to just kind of make comments and notes as we go. Other people I know, they've used, I think it's called Clip Studio Paint. And, you know, like the benefit of something like Clip Studio Paint, which used to be, I think it's called Manga Art Pro. I think that's what it used to be. Anyway, they have a function in Clip Studio Paint where you can just click and drag and then they'll make word bubbles for you. And then, oh my gosh, there's another app that I discovered where you can actually take your Word doc. oh gosh, I'm sorry, I wish I knew what it was, but I think it's something that you can download from the App Store on like an iPad. I don't know if there's a desktop version of it, but it's a hybrid where you can draw, you can make the word bubbles, but then you can also import your Word doc, and then it takes the dialogue and then it converts it into word balloons. Like I forgot the name of the app, but it's like, oh my God, that would save me months. That would save me so much time. It's amazing. I mean, so really, I think in the end, I think what most comic people understand and agree on is that there's no right or wrong way to make a comic. It's just any means necessary to get to point B.
Oh, and I sorry, I forgot. I also used InDesign when I was laying out all the panels for my mock-ups, and that's ultimately what I handed off to my designer, was my layered InDesign file, because that's what they send to the printer anyway, is an InDesign file. So she just
Allison, that needs to be like a challenge to the audience. Somebody has to find out what that app is.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, I guess. Check out my Twitter feed later on. I'll find it and I'll tweet it out. Like, everybody get this. I'm trying to find it. I'm sorry. I left you guys all hanging.
Great.
I apologize.
I'm going to do just 2 more questions here, and Mike really just led us into the next one, because one of the questions really has to do with kind of the editorial back and forth versus the design back and forth, and how is that different from your work in picture books, stepping into the comic or graphic novel aspect? Like, what does it look like, that balance back and forth between editorial and art direction?
I think Dan and I are going to have different stories, maybe, because my editor, this was her first graphic novel as well. So we just approached it the same way that we approached picture books. I mean, she had her notes, you know, I mean, a story is a story, right? So she's like, here's where I think we need some kind of transitional device, or here's where I think the narrative needs to be clarified, or, you know, things like that. My editor's Laura Godwin. She's very hands-off for the most part, and she just gets into it when she thinks the story needs some help. And then the art direction, so my art director was Mallory Gregg, who was so great to work with. And my designer was Colleen A.F. Venable, who I said has lots of graphic novel experience. So I relied a lot on her recommendations for making visual adjustments that really helped the book. One of my favorite things that she did was she went through and circled all the funny tangents. So the way that things align with the panels can indirectly like lead the eye, obviously. And so there were some funny ones that she circled for me. My favorite was like this one panel was like a giant head of someone talking, and then underneath it was a panel with a few characters, and their body was cropped right underneath the big head. So she's like, this looks like a little body with a giant head, the way it's aligned, you know. So it's funny things like that that maybe you don't encounter in a picture book so much. But anyway, it's just more time consuming, I think, is the big difference. But Dan, do you want to?
I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question. I was trying to find the app, and
The question was really about the editorial and creative direction process as it relates to.
So yeah, from my experience, I think so much of it exists in the head of the person making the comic that you really are in the driver's seat most of the time. You know, if there's any questions that are raised, like you hope to get it all sorted out in the sketching and the paneling and the script phase. But, you know, occasionally there is a moment where it ends up in the final art where maybe, I don't know, maybe it's that additional spit and polish at the end where they look at it and they say, the sequence isn't reading properly. And a lot of it is just a matter of miscommunication of one panel to the next. You know, it's easy to like just, you know, like maybe if there's something in the story that just isn't working out properly, like the solution might actually be like a simple addition of a page where you clarify that, you know, adding more panels, taking away panels, which is why I like to leave the freedom digitally to kind of, you know, pull away and add things if I have to. But yeah, I mean, it can be hard, like if those things aren't figured out early on, which is why I outlined, because you know, sometimes when you're working on a graphic novel, the story could be so tight that if you pull out a piece, it's like a tight ball of twine that just unravels, and then suddenly you're creating ripples in like earlier chapters or later chapters. So yeah, I mean, before you go into any final art, you just have to make sure that everything is solid. Ultimately, the story is tantamount. It's everything.
That's great. Thank you. We're going to end. There are a million questions in there. We are going to end with just one question, and I'm going to add a little tangent onto it. This question comes from Aaron Becker. And
Who's that?
Aaron,
Becker.
I know. Says, working on a project now that feels like it's graphic novel in scope, but I'm not a comics guy, nor do I work quickly. Can you talk me into giving it a go? I'll add the tangent. Could you talk him into giving it a go? Or maybe whatever else you say.
Aaron, are you doing a picture book? Are you turning it into a picture book? I'm waiting for your, because I don't see why. Can you talk? Well, just say yes or no. I think we're I mean, you know, I mean, technically one could say that Lift is the comments that I see for Lift is that it's a graphic novel picture book. So, I mean, yeah, you're making a comic if that's how you
wow, I can talk now.
Oh, hello. So yeah, so what are you doing here? Like, what is the thing you're making?
First of all, you guys are amazing, and this whole thing is
Oh,
like,
you're amazing.
No, like it's a mini
Shut up.
lesson. I wish I had recorded it. No, I'm writing a story that's like growing. It's like basically screenplay size story, and a lot of the stories I write are that big and can't fit into a picture book, let alone a wordless one. And I keep boxing myself into this, and I keep thinking I've got to like take the plunge and try and make a graphic novel, but I'm frightened for obvious reasons, and so that's my, you know, I'm gonna probably try, but I have a feeling it's going to get whittled down to something like a smaller scope of a story in book form, and then the screenplay will be the screenplay, you know.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, you're already a master storyteller, like in a wordless format, which kind of does lend itself to comics in a way. Like if you can tell a story without words, I think you can tell it, you know, sequentially. I mean, your books are already, you know, if you think about picture books in general, they're already sequential in a way, right? Because you have, if you think of each page turn as a separate panel. Anyway, what were you going to say, Dan?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, one could, right. Okay. I mean, one could debate that Journey is a comic, you know? I mean, you're basically using images to tell the story. Like, you know, I mean, if that's how we want to get really technical about it, you know? I mean, you know, you take David Wiesner. There's not really much different from Tuesday to Mr. Waffles. It's just he's adding more panels. I think for you, I think the best way to approach it is maybe just start thumbnailing, you know, and then look at it and think and see for yourself if adding more panels does greater justice to the story.
That's a really good suggestion. Or if I'm
no, you're
tired.
great.
Or
No,
if,
you're
or if I get tired of doing thumbnails.
No, you're great.
No, I just, you know, I know I can do, I know I could do, you know, a 40-page book. You know, it's more like the scale is the problem. Like, can I do that? Can I do that storytelling over the course of 200-300 pages or more, like a stamina issue maybe? It's like you're talking to a sprinter who wants to run a marathon. You're like, maybe it's not such a great idea.
Can I interject something though? Because something that coming away from this, I started off thinking, oh, never, 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 never. But listening to these two, I realized the story is the story is the story. I think Dan said so, like, you tell the story. And when you see how you've plotted it out, when you get to the end of the story, that's when you start to think, well, how many pages is it? And when you start saying to yourself, I got to ink 2 pages a day, you know, I mean, it happens. It happens. And I probably think whatever your story is, let it be what it is.
Right.
I don't know if there's a technical definition for how many pages a book has to be before it can be called a graphic novel as opposed to like a picture book with comics. You know, I mean, there's probably not like a hardcore definition. But I do think that what I love about talking to you two guys is the passion you bring to it. These are projects you worked on behind the scenes while you're working on other books that are coming out all the time. Do you know what I mean? And what fuels you is you're in love with that project. And so probably,
right.
I've come to realize it doesn't really matter how long it is. It could be like a lifetime oeuvre. I had to get that word in there. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry. That hurt you. But no, when I met Tom Feelings, he was working on a book. It was 1975 that came out in 1995. You know what I mean? It was his passion project. You know what I mean? And I always thought, aside from being a hero in terms of deadlines, he said it takes what it takes. It takes the time it takes. And if you have a project like that you're in love with, I see that now as like, it's not so daunting when you look at it that way, that you may be doing other things in the foreground, you know, and that's when you keep going. I'm just impressed that your styles don't change over time from page 1 to page 90 or whatever. You know what I mean? That you can hold on to a particular style when time has passed like that.
Oh yeah, no, characters do change by the end and you find yourself having to go back and redraw.
Yeah. I know we're way over time. I had 2 questions for them, one for each of them, rather, which was, because you mentioned finding out what you shouldn't do. Can each one of you tell us what to avoid? Like what kind of pitfalls you ran into that you would warn somebody against? Is there anything not to do?
I think this kind of gets back to Erin's question is like, psyching yourself out is easy to do because it's so big. It's so much work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he said like, you know, should you run a marathon if you're a sprinter? It's like, well, you still have legs, right? You just need to remember you're a runner and you just have to adapt. And it's very much about digging in there. And for me, because the book was so personal, there were parts of it that were hard, like emotionally heavy.
Oh, memoir, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are certain days where it's just like, you know what? I'm not going to touch this page today. I'm going to go to a happier part of the book and make this illustration about fart jokes.
Yeah.
So you just have to be active.
Okay.
Pitfalls to avoid. Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see a person getting psyched out by it. And I think, you know, the process, it's so long, like halfway through it, you can probably tell yourself like, why am I doing this? You know, and then just stop. And, you know, really it is the belief in the project. And I mean, I don't know about your experience, Mike, but for me, like doing a memoir, it was very therapeutic. You know, it's almost like, you know, like you are your own psychologist because you're taking these painful moments from your past and you're dissecting every second of it. And then, but then as a person trying to give a voice to like the other components of the story, like you're filling in the blanks and kind of coming to peace with it, or maybe just getting a better understanding of what happened. You know, and like for me, like for my memoir, like I've written 2 or 3 drafts and, you know, my editors come back saying like, this is very angry. This is very angry. And so, you know, we kind of had to change gears and like, I'm writing something different for now, but I still have this other memoir in mind. But, you know, like you definitely have a peace of mind and, you know, people aren't going to see that draft ever, but like now, like just on a personal level, like I don't regret not writing that, despite the fact that it probably won't ever be published. But yeah, I mean, just like I said, I think the best way to approach is just start with a 1-page comic and then just try to broaden your way out.
Do it. Just do it. Thank you, Allison and George. And I think that probably when you have the graphic novel workshop, you know, everybody can get into digging deeply.
So
Deeply.
Allison was texting me on the side and said this is almost going to turn into a master class. So you could imagine this whole master class, and maybe Aaron could be like our case study, and he could join every.
Watch Aaron.
Show us
Volunteer.
I'm
You
no
have
guinea
until-
Yeah. Just commenting like, no, don't do that, don't do that. No.
This is what happens when you stick your head up.
Thanks so much, Dan and Mike. This was really
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. Nice to talk to people outside of my own home for a change.
So nice.
Pat, you've done another awesome job. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great to see
Thank
you
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll see you next week,
Yeah.
Pat.
Ah!
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you. Bye.